The Battle of Rapido River was an Allied attempt to break through the Italian winter line from January 20th to 22nd, 1944 during World War II. It represented one of the most devastating defeats for the United States during the war. As U.S. soldiers crossed the Gari River by boat, they were cut off from any support and came under heavy attack from the German 15th Panzergrenadier Division on the opposing bank. Initially intended to lure away German forces from the Allied amphibious landings at Anzio on the nearby coast south of Rome, 2 days of fighting completely crushed the Americans, with no goals accomplished and deep controversy following. The coming battle. The Italian campaign reached a boiling point at the end of 1943, with the Allied leaders prioritizing the Western Front at the Turin Conference to liberate German-occupied Europe. The Mediterranean Peninsula was given less importance. 7 veteran English-American divisions had already withdrawn to participate in the Normandy landings planned for June of 1944. Yet Winston Churchill still felt that the Italian campaign was of great importance. Although the Allies were positioned to open up a new front, he believed that victory in Italy was essential for strategy and politics. Churchill believed that destroying the Germans in Italy would position Britain and America to fight from Southeast Europe rather than rely on the Red Army. The 15th Army Group would later be called the Allied Armies in Italy. At the time, Churchill ordered its commander, General Sir Harold R.L.G. Alexander, to pressure significant strategic objectives. He hoped this would lead to positive propaganda in the United Kingdom and demoralization in Italy. The Allied progress through Italy stagnated near Monte Cassino, a crucial point for Axis powers fortified now as the Winter Line. The Allied commanders strategized and came up with Operation Shingle, which sought to outflank the Germans through an amphibious landing at Anzio, only 51 kilometers from Rome. To ensure the success of these landings, the Allied forces planned to launch a series of attacks to the south, which would ideally give the Allies control over both rivers, Garigliano and Rapido. They hoped the Germans would focus their attention away from Anzio to recover the territories. The official planning for the Battle of Rapido River began on Christmas 1943 at a villa near Tunis, where Winston Churchill, British officers, and Dwight Eisenhower met. It felt like the war in Italy was mostly Britain's fight. However, troops from both the UK and the US were fighting there and under terrible weather conditions. Subjected to cold snow, mud, and rain, the soldiers were valiantly taking one ridge to the next. Still, the American military had all but exclusively set its sights on the liberation of France and wanted to stop any further advances in Italy. To convince the president, Churchill argued that continuing to fight in Italy, rather than merely holding their positions, would push the Germans to keep their troops stationed rather than marching into France. Churchill proposed the landing of troops at Anzio and launching the attacks at Rapido River and Monte Cassino. He hoped the Allies could capture Rome over a brief period of a couple days. After much debating, Eisenhower reluctantly agreed and told Churchill, quote, "I think you're making a mistake." Still confident, the British Prime Minister moved forward with his plan, placing it in the hands of Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark. Do what you're told. Initially meant as part of a diversionary strategy to distract the Germans, the Allies landed at Anzio. Their attempt to attack following the crossing of the Gari River was dashed, and a harrowing defeat for the United States followed. It produced absolutely no strategic or territorial gains for the Allies. Lieutenant General Mark Clark served as commanding general of the United States 5th Army, and with the assistance of the 141st and 143rd Regiments of the 36th Infantry Division, led by Major General Fred Walker, was in charge of crossing the Gari River to the south of Monte Cassino. General Clark had only experienced an amphibious assault once, 4 months prior, during Operation Avalanche at Salerno. It was a blunder due to his poor planning. The Germans had arrived ashore and nearly pushed his forces back into the sea. Now he was tasked with conducting not one, but 2 amphibious assaults. Among the troops, there was widespread pessimism. Mostly soldiers felt that the chosen location was too complicated to maneuver. Many were convinced that the attack site was the worst it possibly could be because it targeted a bend in the river with strong German defense. Private James D. White, who was 19 years old at the time, would later recall, quote, "Everyone was very, very leery about the attack because we all felt sure it was going to be difficult, but you do what you're told." Clark had even modified Churchill's proposal a bit, preparing Rapido to make the Germans think more American troops would hit the target. That way he could capture the German detention and get them to send reinforcements from Anzio to the Rapido River area. In theory, the plan seemed simple, but officers and troops had little to no hopes it could be pulled off. The commanding officer of the 36th Infantry Division stated, quote, "I swear I do not see how we or any other division can possibly succeed in crossing the Rapido River." Clark, on the other hand, was sure they would succeed. He was so sure that he had Major General Ernest Harmon prepare 1st Armored Division tanks to cross the river and move towards Rome immediately after building bridges. Major General Harmon reportedly stated that such a thing would be impossible. In a final attempt, General Walker pleaded with Clark to change the attack's location. Instead, he wanted to attack north of Monte Cassino, where the river was shallow and the defenses weaker. Clark could not be moved. Walker would later write, quote, "They do not understand the problems and do not know what I'm talking about." The Battle of Rapido River. On the night of January 20th, 1944, the 36th Infantry Division launched their artillery barrage on the German defensive points from across the Gari River. It accomplished little. As soon as the barrage ended, the 141st and 143rd Infantry Regiments crossed the river. 243rd Rifle Companies attempted to cross the river, though many of their boats were destroyed, stranding the men. General Clark reached the trenches, but was bombed by a German shell, injuring his arm and shoulder. He recovered, serving as a supply officer for the rest of the war. Later, he would be subjected to a congressional investigation, which absolved him of responsibility for the battle, while simultaneously recognizing that it was, quote, "one of the most colossal blunders of the Second World War." The American troops soon discovered that every inch of land across the river was under defense. Behind barbed wire, the Germans rained fire down on the invaders, using rockets, artillery, mortars, and machine guns. The American soldiers tried helplessly to establish a position. Private James D. White recalled the harrowing experience later, quote, "I went across a little narrow footbridge about 2 feet wide, which engineers had anchored to the other side. We didn't have that far to go, so our whole battalion made it. We no more had gotten across when the Germans opened up on us. The terrain on that side of the river was flat, so we started digging in right away. All morning and all day long, the Germans poured artillery fire on us. They had us trapped in a pocket. We had the river at our backs and nowhere to go. Guys were getting square hit with mortar shells coming right into their foxholes. My first sergeant was hit with machine gun fire across his legs. Somebody got him dug into a hole where he took a square hit from a mortar. Because we were dug in so close together, the Germans couldn't miss us." The following day, the regiment attempted another attack with slightly more success. They couldn't hold a position for too long, since they hadn't built Bailey or floating bridges due to the attacks. Until that occurred, they'd be stranded. Over 20 hours of fighting elapsed before they were ordered to withdraw. The Germans trapped them by destroying their boats and walking bridges. A counterattack left Americans captured or dead. Private White was one of the 500 or so 36th Division soldiers taken as a POW. His memories of the battle would haunt him for the rest of his life. POWs. The families of the prisoners of war received dreaded telegrams informing them of their sons' situations. Private White's telegram read, quote, "The Secretary of War desires to express his deepest regret that your son, Private James D. White, has been reported missing in action since January 23rd in Italy. If any further details or other information are received, you will be properly notified." The telegram was soon followed by another on April 14th, 1944, informing them that their son was captive and gave them the exact address he was held at. They were allowed to send food and a few treats. The cost of the failed mission was felt by both the Army and civilians whose family members couldn't be located or were still POWs. No gains had been made, no Germans had given up their area. The controversy surrounding the battle was only exacerbated once Clark criticized Walker for his execution of the plan. Walker criticized the idea itself. The Battle of the Rapido River represented one of the most significant losses for the U.S. Army during the Second World War. Liberation. The American prisoners of war began receiving hints of hope as the Eastern German lines fell to Soviet forces. They would get only bits of news, but it became increasingly clear that they would be liberated. Private White was transferred to another facility, along with the other prisoners. They spent months walking, with little access to food and no accommodations. He was part of a group of 300 prisoners, moved 600 miles westward. He was liberated on April 13th, 1945, near Frankfurt. He recalled the moment, stating, quote, "We heard firing and saw fighter planes overhead, so we knew Americans weren't too far away. These fellows in jeeps and armored cars came up and found us. The German guards turned their weapons over to us. There was one guard who had a dog, and it was mean. He'd sicked that dog on the prisoners. A lot of the guys were determined to do something to this dog, but before they had a chance to do anything to it, the guard shot the dog himself. They were placed in civilian houses for a few days, and were then flown to France. Most of the liberated soldiers were then moved home from Camp Lucky Strike to a major embarkation point. White was reunited with his family, even though few soldiers who fought at the Battle of Rapido River were.